This is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. With us now are Alex Andreou, broadcaster and commentator, and former Conservative Special Advisor Anita Boateng. They'll be going through the papers with us, but now let's take a quick look at what is on some of those front pages. Well, starting with The Observer and its first edition under new ownership. The image, Presidents Trump and Zelensky meeting ahead of the funeral of Pope Francis. The headline, The Pope's Last Act. The Sunday Times says the meeting has raised hopes that there may soon be peace at last in Ukraine. The Sunday Mirror shows the two presidents talking and also the Pope being carried to his final resting place with the headline, Hope Amid the Tears. While its sister paper, the Sunday People, describes it as a legacy of hope. This is the front of the Sunday Express. Farewell, Francis. And the sun rest in peace. But while Trump and Zelensky are talking in positive terms about peace in Ukraine, the Telegraph says that Trump has turned on Vladimir Putin, accusing the Russian leader of stringing him along in negotiations. The Mail on Sunday claims an exclusive with a story that Prime Minister Keir Starmer once had a long-term relationship with a judge who's been accused of being influenced by trans activists. And finally, The Star tells us, in only fools and horses terms, that the use of artificial intelligence and chatbots is turning us into a nation of plonkers. And we are joined tonight by Alex Andreou and Anita Boateng. Thank you so much for being with us. I mean, it's obvious, two amazing pictures that we have, and we obviously see in the papers. One is, I guess, I don't know, the grandeur of Pope Francis's funeral, even though he wouldn't like that word to be used. He wanted to be simple, but I guess you can't. And then the other one is that meeting between Trump and Zelensky. So let's start with the Sunday Times, which has this incredible picture here of the Sunday Times. Oh, I thought it was another one. With a picture of, well, here they have the meeting of Zelensky and Trump, and also pictures of a packed St. Peter's Square. Anita, let's start with you. Let's start with the funeral first. What did you make of it? What have you made of the coverage?
I mean, it's beautiful. It was moving, it was somber, it was symbolic. It had things to say about the world and about peace. And I think it is wonderful to have so many mourners from all walks of life, as well as the sort of jet-setting metropolitan elite that zoomed in on their private jets for a funeral that, as you say, Pope Francis wanted to be simple. But seeing those kind of ordinary people from Rome, but all around the world, coming together to celebrate the Pope and to be in this moment, I think was special. And I think that's what I felt, kind of seeing the footage of it.
And Anita, let me just stop you there, because we've got some breaking news. Let me bring that to you now. Counter-terrorism policing Northeast says it has taken over the investigation into an incident in Leeds, which left two women seriously injured due to the circumstances surrounding the incident. So they've now taken over the investigation. That news breaking literally in the past minute. We will bring you more on that as we get it here on Sky News. Let's continue with the press preview. Alex, let's just look at the front page of The Observer. Yeah. And again, that picture, again, I'm really keen, though, to also see some pictures of the square or the funeral. So if we also pull up the Sunday Mirror. And there it is, the funeral of Pope Francis. I mean, it's interesting. They, too, have both pictures. So that meeting, that iconic picture now, I guess, between Trump and Zelensky, but also the simple casket, just wood and zinc, different to other popes before him, that simple coffin now being taken to burial. Same question to you. What did you make of the coverage?
I found it quite touching. I'm not a religious person, but I am respectful of religion and other people's spirituality. And I thought the contrast, actually, between the goldness and Baroque sort of imposing character of the cathedrals there contrasted to that simple pine box. I found it very touching, because I thought this is a man who has lived his entire life a particular way, and his wishes obviously reflect that even to his funeral. And I got the same impression that I got actually at the late Queen's funeral, that it is at that moment, I think, that you realize what a lonely position it is, what a lonely existence it is. When that coffin made its way across, it was a very solitary experience, you know, just that one person that carried quite a big weight, quite a lot of decisions, you know, had the platform for an entire church with 1 billion followers around the world, and who listen to what he says and the guidance that he gives. And it must be just an enormous responsibility to carry.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you talked about the Queen's funeral, because, Anita, there's very few events in the world that really will get the world's attention. Death of a pope, you know, death of the late Queen. And that's why you saw so many world leaders, and this incredible picture with Zelensky and Trump, and the other one with Keir Starmer and Macron as well, sort of symbolizing the West. There's very few occasions like that.
Yeah, and actually I was kind of struck seeing some of those images, particularly the one of Macron and Starmer and Trump and Zelensky, of the kind of the Notre Dame, the kind of reopening of Notre Dame. Again, a kind of old world moment where the world comes together to cherish something that feels, in some ways, of a kind of bygone era, but something that has so much history and meaning. And the fact that world leaders find those moments and find that time to connect with that, I think, says something quite important about where we are as a nation. I think in so many ways, and as a world, we tend to believe that we are obsessively modern, that we really only care about the new, and that there aren't these kind of moments that bring the world together. But I think these moments, I think this is always kind of a beautiful reminder to me that of humanity, of the way that we all share grief as one of the things that connects us all together, and that there are these leaders that represent something and the idea that is greater than ourselves, that do kind of shepherd moments in history. So I don't know. I found it really important, and I think seeing the number of world leaders assembled was powerful.
Yeah. Let's look at the picture on the front of the Sunday People. And again, they're calling it there. So the Sunday People, Legacy of Hope. And again, it's that balance, you know, St. Peter's Square, they're absolutely packed all the way back. And of course, there was a procession, which was quite a new thing, because most popes, certainly in the past century, have been buried in the Vatican, whereas Francis chose not to. So you had that going past the Colosseum, very strong pictures. But then the hope of, you know, that picture you were talking about, Anita, with the 4 leaders. Pope Francis had said he wanted a simple funeral. Did you sense, I mean, you know, I guess it's relative, but did you sense anything different, that there was an element of simplicity, or do you think it's just impossible if you're Pope?
I mean, like I said, I thought his personal arrangements were very simple. And the fact that actually that he chose to be buried at a different church that is in quite a rundown area of Rome is also quite symbolic, where he had spent a lot of time ministering after homeless people, and you know, he did a lot of work there. So I mean, in the context of the Catholic Church losing its pontiff, it was as simple as it could be, I guess.
Yeah.
But it is also interesting, the political atmosphere around it, how difficult it must be to organize. It must be like the worst wedding seating chart in the world. You know, who do you put on the front row? Where do you put them in relation to each other?
So it was done by alphabetical order with the leaders, but their names in French, so the names of their countries in French. That's why you didn't have the United States and Ukraine sitting next to one another. So that's why it was done.
Would have
so
been
it's
interesting.
all, yeah, because French being apparently the language of diplomacy for the Vatican. Yeah, so there you go. Anita, what do you think this tells us about the role of religion in politics today? Because it's interesting, you know, we say 1.4 billion Catholics, but I think a lot more, you know, other people, not necessarily Catholic or even Christian or even believers, might have followed this. Do you think Do you think it says something about the role of religion in politics as well these days?
Yeah, I mean, I remember seeing the Pope when I went to Rome, probably about 8 years ago now. And actually, it was for Easter and the Easter address. I'm Christian, but I'm not Catholic. And it was amazing. It was in terms of the kind of, not just the kind of sense of religious feeling, but I think that this Pope in particular really did connect to political agendas, really did want to engage on political issues. And I think, Andre, you talked about the fact that the Pope symbolically wanted to be buried in a poor area. I don't think it was just symbolic. I think actually, practically, it's probably going to bring in a lot of visitors to an area that isn't commonly seen, that might therefore secure greater investment. There might be greater opportunities in terms of tourism and trade. Like, this has always been a political Pope, and I wonder if that continues. And if you look at the nature of the address, I mean, all about peace, about how war does not benefit, that sort of seems like it could be kind of just fairly glib, kind of political, kind of religious sentiment. But in the context of having President Trump and President Zelensky in the audience, I think it had a very different flavour.
Yeah.
And certainly, like, you know, even Zelensky being applauded as he turned up, I think a symbol of where Europe is on this very political question of this war. I mean, there was some politics at play.
Listen, the
Alex,
Pope is-
forgive
sorry.
me. We have more developments on that store coming out of Leeds. I just want to bring you some more breaking news on the story we brought you a moment ago regarding that serious incident in Leeds. Now, counter-terrorism policing Northeast said it has taken over the investigation. A statement from counter-terrorism policing Northeast said a crossbow and a firearm were recovered from the scene in Otley Road in Leeds after 2 women were seriously injured. They say officers attended and located 3 people who had suffered injuries, 2 of whom were women and were taken to hospital for treatment. The third, a 38-year-old man, has been arrested and taken to hospital due to a self-inflicted injury. They go on to say 2 weapons have been recovered from the scene, which were a crossbow and a firearm. The statement added, due to the circumstances surrounding the incident, counter-terrorism policing Northeast have taken responsibility for leading the investigation with the support of West Yorkshire Police. Now, they go on to say that extensive inquiries continue to establish the full circumstances and explore any potential motivation. So the latest lines coming into us from that incident in Otley Road in Leeds after 2 women were seriously injured. There we will, of course, bring you the latest on that as we get more developments on that. Okay, so final point. Sorry, Alex and Anita. Let's go back to the papers now. Just that point, and I think you were both mentioning it. Just the role of religion in politics. I mean, obviously, we saw that it did become a diplomatic situation as well. You know, funeral diplomacy, I suppose you could call it in a way. So Trump there speaking to Zelensky, and then Trump turning against Putin. They always say that Trump listens to the last person he spoke to. I mean, this would kind of prove the point. Because he sent a tweet insinuating that perhaps President Putin wasn't pushing for peace hard enough. Anita.
Yes. So it's sort of, I mean, it's not inaccurate, but it's interesting timing that Trump says in reflection, you know, he basically feels that, you know, there needs to be more action or a response, that maybe Putin doesn't want to stop the war because there's been this continued military action. He talks about Putin shooting missiles into civilian areas. I'm sure a point that Zelensky pressed home very, very strongly during their conversation at the Vatican. And in particular, obviously, this is the first time Zelensky and Trump have met face-to-face since that infamous blow-up in February in the White House. And clearly, Zelensky's really pressed his point because not only is Trump saying that Putin is misbehaving in terms of what he's been doing in the area with respect to the ceasefire, but also says maybe he needs to be dealt with differently. And I'm quoting directly there, talks about banking or secondary sanctions. Now, those don't seem to be the toughest options in the president's arsenal, but nevertheless a change in tone.
I mean, the only surprising thing about this is that Trump is surprised about this. When Pete Hegseth turned up to the Munich Defense Conference and effectively gave away the US's negotiating position by saying no membership of NATO will freeze borders wherever they are at that point of the conflict. What did he think that message was to Putin? Keep going with the conflict, because if you're gaining ground, whatever the lines are at the point of negotiation, that's what you get to preserve. So obviously the signal to Putin was to keep going. And every single security expert in the world said so in that moment. And, you know, Trump seems to be the only person that got the memo 2 months later.
Yeah, I mean, well, we'll see if he did get the memo, because, you know, we'll see if anything
Yeah, we'll
comes
see
out
what he
of this
posts tomorrow.
Yes. Anita, let's look at a different story. Front page of the Mail on Sunday. The headline here, Keir Starmer's ex-girlfriend is pro-trans judge. Now, in the past week, of course, we had that judgment by the Supreme Court about the definition of woman and linking it to biology. Talk us through this story.
Yes, well, it's just as you say. The Mail has gotten hold of a new biography that says that Keir Starmer used to have clearly a kind of long-term relationship with a woman called Maya Sakand, who is a high-flying barrister. And according to this book, 6 years ago, she was accused of being part of a group that explicitly endorsed the trans rights agenda. Don't really know what that means. I'm sort of slightly struggling to understand exactly the direct connection with Keir Starmer's position, because you might not always agree with your girlfriend, particularly your ex-girlfriend of 6 years ago. But nevertheless, you know, the Mail's interested in it.
Yeah, no, this is 6 years that she said this. She was his girlfriend like 20 years ago.
Yeah, 20 years ago.
Because that would be a story if she had a girlfriend 6 years ago. But no, I mean, the whole thing has the feel of, you know, my cousin's barber heard from someone that...
I suppose this gets to the issue of how Keir Starmer had dithered about the definition of woman, whereas now he seems to be siding, obviously, with the Supreme Court.
Listen, the Supreme Court is the Supreme Court. That's why it's called that. And you either support the rule of law or you don't. I don't agree with the decision. I think it stores up a lot of problems for the future. I think whenever you try to simplify a really complicated situation, there will be cases that fall either side of that clear line that make a mockery of what you were trying to do. However, you know, it's the Mail that chooses to describe the Supreme Court as enemies of the people one day and wise sages the next. If you support the rule of law, then their say on the interpretation of the law goes. And this is the situation we have now, whether we individually agree with it or not. The slightly worrying thing is that I think it's being overinterpreted, because this was a decision that was made specifically about the Equality Act. You know, it mentioned provisions in the Equality Act that had to do with maternity leave and things like that. And, you know, it was based very specifically on the Act. The definition exists in other acts, and some of the legal challenges we will see in the next few years will be about what the definition is under a different piece of legislation.
I'm sure it's a story we'll be discussing in weeks and months to come. Last story, Daily Star on Sunday. Get the front page up. There it is. Anita, talk us through this.
I love a star piece.
You've got 20 seconds.
Boffins say we're using AI too much and it's making us plonkers. It's time to put down the ChatGPT and start having conversation again. I love it.
So say boffins.
It's always boffins. Alex, Anita, thank you both so much. See you in the next hour. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, more on the Pope's funeral. Stay with us.